Have you ever wondered what happens when the kindest person you know suddenly snaps? I don't mean raising their voice or walking away in frustration. I mean a quiet, calculated unraveling, a slow detachment, the soft smile replaced by a gaze you can't quite decipher, a presence that once felt warm, now cold, unreadable. Most people think empaths are delicate, fragile souls designed to absorb the emotions of others, destined to carry the burdens no one else wants. And for the most part, it's true. Empaths move through life as mirrors for other people's feelings. They can sense what's left unsaid in a conversation, pick up on the tension you thought you'd hidden, and offer comfort without being asked. It's a gift, but like every gift, it comes at a cost. Because what happens when the person who's always been the healer, the confidant, the safe harbor, begins to realize they've become invisible in their own life? What happens when the empath notices that the room falls silent when they speak, or that their needs are always the last to be considered? When the people who once leaned on them for comfort don't even notice the exhaustion in their eyes? Most of us don't think about it. We love having empaths around because they're predictable in their kindness. They're the ones who won't say no, who'll listen at 3 a.m., who'll forgive what should have been unforgivable. But Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant and unsettling minds in psychology, warned us about this pattern long ago. He believed that the greatest danger in human relationships isn't hatred or anger. It's unconsciousness, when people fail to truly see one another, when empathy is taken for granted and silence mistaken for consent. And it's in this quiet neglect that the most dangerous transformation occurs. An empath who has been pushed too far doesn't explode in fury. They detach. They withdraw their psychic energy, and in doing so, they reclaim a part of themselves that had been dormant for years. That's when the shift happens. That's when the empath becomes a force people no longer recognize. The people who once relied on them suddenly sense a distance they can't bridge. Conversations feel strained, eye contact fleeting. The empath has stopped playing the role assigned to them. And this unsettling unpredictability is what makes a fed-up empath the most dangerous kind, because they've tasted their own power. This isn't just pop psychology. Jung theorized that every individual possesses a reservoir of psychic energy, a kind of life force that determines how we interact with the world. When too much of that energy is invested externally, in other people's problems, moods, and validation, we suffer psychic depletion. But the moment we redirect that energy inward, we trigger what Jung called the process of individuation, a journey toward integrating our true, authentic self. And nothing terrifies society more than a person who no longer needs it for validation. You see, society depends on certain people remaining in fixed roles. The giver, the peacemaker, the nurturer. It maintains balance. But when someone steps out of that role, especially someone whose kindness has kept others afloat, it forces a reckoning. People are confronted with their own dependency, their own unconscious selfishness. The mirror the empath once held for them shatters, and they're left to face their own reflection unaided. In this video, we're going to explore exactly why this transformation is so unsettling, why Carl Jung believed that psychic depletion wasn't just a personal issue, but a societal one, and how a fed-up empath doesn't become dangerous because they suddenly turn cruel, but because they learn to prioritize themselves, and in doing so, become immune to manipulation. We'll dissect Jung's theories on psychic energy, emotional availability, and the collective unconscious. We'll look at real-world examples of how empaths are conditioned into emotional servitude, and what happens when they break free. And finally, we'll uncover why Jung believed this reclamation of psychic energy is one of the most powerful and subversive acts a person can commit in a world that depends on unconscious compliance. So before we go any further, let me ask you, have you ever felt like the more you gave, the less you were seen? Have you ever noticed that when you finally said no, people reacted not with understanding, but with anger or withdrawal? And have you ever wondered what would happen if you stopped being available altogether? If so, you might be closer to that transformation than you think. Stay with me, because what we're about to uncover won't just change the way you see empaths. It'll change the way you see yourself. The moment you begin to recognize how easily your kindness is commandeered, You see the hidden architecture of expectations that have grown around you like vines. Families lean on the empath as the emotional cornerstone. Older siblings expect you to smooth over every sibling squabble. Parents count on you to decipher the unspoken tension when words fall short. Extended relatives assume you'll provide the silent support that no one else has the patience to give. At work, you become the go-to conflict resolver, the person who volunteers to handle the fallout after every project hiccup, the soul who carries team morale on shoulders already bowed by exhaustion. Even friendships whisper a quiet demand. You'll understand, you'll forgive, you'll fix it, as though your empathy were an endless reservoir. Unconsciously, society has woven a script in which you play the healer, the buffer, the safety net. To step off that stage is to break a contract written in invisible ink. When you first sense that everyone depends on your unceasing availability, it feels like a privilege until you notice the toll. You begin arriving at family gatherings with a tightness in your chest, scanning the room for emotional fractures only you can repair. You accept last-minute work calls with a Pavlovian reflex, picking up the phone even when every impulse screams for rest. You respond to your friend's midnight crisis text with your own sleep dwindling as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yet when you finally draw a line, refuse the family meeting to protect your peace, let the project manager handle his own fallout, ignore the group chat that never pauses, it feels like betrayal. Faces fall, disappointment seeps into voices, and cracks appear in relationships you once believed unshakable. In that moment, you understand the unspoken price of empathy. People come to rely on it, unconsciously, and assume it will always be there. When it vanishes, they panic. Imagine a close circle of colleagues accustomed to your role as the emotional thermostat. Every team conflict, every prick of tension, every testy email once found its way to you. You smoothed egos, brokered apologies, infused every meeting with warmth. But on the day you refuse to mediate, you choose silence instead of soothing words, you turn your back on the gossip, the room tilts off kilter. Suddenly, people realize how bereft they feel without the empath's bomb. The air grows thick, the unspoken conflicts swirl unchecked. Those colleagues who once championed your reputation now whisper behind closed doors, "She's changed. She's too cold." This betrayal fantasy is one of the empath's greatest fears, and society exploits it mercilessly. You feel guilty for protecting your energy. The faintest whiff of judgment, real or imagined, sends you rushing back into service only to be drained anew. In this way, the unconscious expectation becomes a trap. The empath cannot win. To give endlessly is to lose oneself. To refuse is to risk exile. Worse still, this dynamic extends beyond individuals into cultural norms. We idolize caregivers and celebrate selflessness. We call mothers angels, warriors heroes, volunteers saints. Yet we seldom ask what it costs the angels, the heroes, the saints. We embed heroes in myths as paragons of sacrifice, encouraging everyone to play small in comparison. Empaths internalize these myths, equating self-sacrifice with virtue. They sacrifice until there is nothing left, then wonder why the world turns away from their empty shell. Consider the shamanic traditions of indigenous cultures where certain individuals, often marked from birth as spiritually sensitive, are called upon to channel community healing. These shamans bear the tribe's wounds in their bodies and souls. Their ceremonies involve absorbing collective pain and transmuting it through ritual. Yet behind the reverence lies a burden so heavy that their lifespans often shortened and their psyches fractured. The tribe gives honor, but the empathic vessel shatters. In modern contexts, mental health professionals, therapists, counselors, social workers are trained to manage these dynamics, to create boundaries, to engage in self-care. But outside the therapeutic realm, empaths are left unguided. They absorb the world's suffering without protocols for release. They give and give until, like a pressure cooker without a valve, they explode or implode. History is littered with stories of empaths who walked away from it all. Poets who abandoned verses midline, preachers who left pulpits unanswered, caregivers who vanished without warning. Their departure felt like an earthquake, a sudden void that sent ripples through every life they had touched. To those left behind, it seemed inexplicable, an act of cruelty rather than self-preservation. And yet, in that radical withdrawal, the empath reclaimed their own soul. One startling example comes from the life of Etty Hillesum, a young Dutch woman whose diaries from the Holocaust reveal an empath driven to the brink. She counseled fellow prisoners, comforted the condemned, and radiated hope in the face of atrocity. Yet she recorded, in passages of harrowing clarity, that she felt her inner core eroding under the weight of others' torment. Her radical act was not to stop helping, but to shift inward, to find a center no brutality could touch. In that act of inward turning, she discovered a freedom that even the gates of Auschwitz could not imprison. This is the unsettling revelation: an empath's greatest weapon is not their kindness, but their refusal to be bound by it. When they stop giving without reflection, when they shield their psychic energy like a fortress, they become unpredictable. And unpredictability is dangerous. Empaths who reclaim their energy no longer respond to the cues that once controlled them. They can say no with gentle firmness, walk away with unflinching calm, and stand their ground without anger. Such individuals embody what Jung described as the archetype of the autonomous self. Stripped of societal roles, giver, helper, healer, they become free agents. They no longer react, they act. They tune into their own inner compass instead of external demands. When they step into this sovereignty, they radiate a quiet power so profound it unsettles those around them. People accustomed to the empath's unconditional availability find that power threatening. It exposes their own reliance, their own unwillingness to face discomfort. Perhaps you've experienced this without realizing why it startled you. You sought comfort only to meet a poised gaze that did not flinch. You expected agreement but heard a calm refusal. You anticipated your burdens echoed back only to encounter serene silence. In that silence lies the empath's reclaimed strength, a power cultivated in the spaces where they once felt most vulnerable. This transformation also poses a grave truth about collective unconscious patterns. Jung argued that society depends on certain individuals to embody light so others can remain in shadow. The empath is that vessel of light, absorbing darkness so the collective can remain comfortable. When the empath withdraws, the darkness returns unfiltered. Society must then confront its unexamined wounds, its unspoken resentments, its neglected fears. This confrontation can feel like a violent upheaval. Riots, rebellions, mass movements spring up when darkness floods back into awareness. Empaths who hold the line between conscious and unconscious are silent heroes. Those who break it become catalysts for change, sometimes peaceful, sometimes turbulent. The most dangerous empaths are not those who lash out in fury, but those who stand still and let the world's shadow wash over them without flinching. Their mere presence forces a reckoning. Where were you when I needed you? What have you been hiding behind your own indifference? As you consider these truths, reflect on your own relationships and environments. Who relies on your empathic labor? What cracks have you patched without thanks? In what arenas have you felt compelled to absorb more than you could safely hold? And most importantly, what would happen if you simply stopped? In the next section, we will arrive at the climactic turning point, the moment when the empath fully awakens to their own power and unleashes it in a way that cannot be ignored. We'll explore the dramatic revelation that binds this journey together, the paradox of empathic withdrawal, and why it can feel like both dark magic and liberation. Prepare yourself, for the truth you are about to face may change not only how you practice empathy, but how you live your life. The air grows heavy with unspoken demands, and you begin to sense a pattern. The more you make yourself available, the more invisible you become. You've smiled through last-minute work crises, soothed family disputes at holiday dinners, and stayed online through midnight group chats, all in the service of keeping the peace. Yet your own voice has grown distant, your needs buried beneath an avalanche of others' expectations. You might think the self-sacrifice makes you indispensable, but in truth it renders you a fixture, taken for granted, erased from the picture. In every setting, home, office, friendship circle, the empath's quiet labor maintains emotional equilibrium. When you step in to quell tension, someone else never learns to manage their own feelings. Over time, you become the silent autopilot, your presence expected, your absence catastrophic. And so you keep giving, even as your own image fades from view. The invisibility is unnerving. You find yourself listening to conversations about your exhaustion as though it belonged to someone else, nodding when they say, "You're always there for us," even as a part of you wonders, "Am I even here at all?" What if being constantly available doesn't make you loved, but invisible? What if kindness, when unbound by limits, becomes the perfect camouflage, hiding you in plain sight? Jung's work on the shadow offers a chilling insight. Traits we overuse become blind spots. Your empathy, once your greatest asset, morphs into your own psychological abyss. The more you pour out, the less you see yourself. The more you serve, the more you lose your face in the crowd. The paradox deepens when we consider the societal structures at play. No one hands you a contract demanding your perpetual availability. It is written in the language of unspoken norms and cultural myths. We Leonize the selfless mother, the tireless nurse, the devoted friend. We celebrate those who give without measure, yet we rarely ask what they trade for that praise. A 2019 study on compassion fatigue in healthcare professionals found that the very act of empathic engagement, left unchecked, leads to emotional exhaustion, burnout, and a sense of reduced personal accomplishment. In other words, the healer becomes the wounded and their pain is buried beneath the veneer of heroism. And it's not only in medicine. In every corner of society, empaths fill the gaps others cannot or will not face. The teacher who stays late to counsel a troubled student, the manager who absorbs team frustration after a failed project, the friend who never leaves another to wallow alone in their grief. Empathy becomes an unpaid job reliant on the empath's unspoken duty to maintain harmony. Yet when you finally refuse one more request, that carefully balanced house of cards collapses. The shockwave rattles relationships, anger, guilt, confusion. Why have you changed? They ask, as though your boundaries were a betrayal rather than an act of self-preservation. What if the greatest danger lies not in the empath's anger, but in their withdrawal? Consider the mirror metaphor. As long as you reflect others' distress, they remain unchallenged, free to avoid their own shadows. But the moment you stop absorbing, the mirror cracks. The raw reflections of unguarded pain flood back. Families see grudges they'd repressed, organizations confront failures they'd glossed over, friendships reveal resentments that festered beneath polite smiles. Your absence becomes a catalyst for collective reckoning. History offers unsettling examples. In ancient Greece, the figure of Cassandra was cursed to speak truths no one would heed. So too does the empath carry warnings, emotional signals others ignore. When the empath finally withdraws, the ignored truths accelerate into crisis. The financial markets crash, social movements erupt, relationships implode. In those moments, people don't blame the empath for stepping back, they curse themselves for never listening. This dynamic is at the heart of rebellion. Jung wrote, the true transformation begins at the edge of consciousness. The empath's fading into shadow compels the collective to confront what lies beneath. But such confrontation is painful. Societies prefer to return to equilibrium, reinstate the empath, silence the unease, restore the illusion of harmony. They pressure you to resume your old role, shower you with praise for your return, then slip back into neglect the moment your back is turned. What if you never returned? What if you held firm, let the darkness wash over the world, and watched it churn? That kind of standstill is revolutionary. It dismantles the unspoken agreement that you must serve as emotional ballast. It exposes the hollow core of relationships built on your empathy alone. And it forces others to learn self-reliance or face the consequences of their dependency. Yet this withdrawal is rare. Guilt claws at the empath's heart. The slightest hint of judgment, real or imagined, drives you back into service. You fear the idea of someone else's pain on your conscience more than your own depletion. Researchers call this secondary trauma, where caregivers internalize the burden of those they help. They believe if they do not absorb the pain, no one will. It's a psychological bind. Freedom feels like abandonment, boundaries feel like betrayal. But there is a counterintuitive insight here. Refusal can be the deepest form of compassion. By preserving your energy, you become sustainable. You model self-care, teaching others that emotional support must be reciprocal. You demonstrate that love need not come at the cost of one person's well-being. When you reclaim yourself, you break the cycle of dependency and invite genuine connection, one in which empathy flows both ways. Scientific research on compassion satisfaction, the positive aspect of caregiving, supports this. Studies show that caregivers who balance empathy with self-care report higher job satisfaction, lower burnout, and healthier personal lives. In other words, the empath who learns to guard their psychic energy doesn't become callous. They become more effective, more present, and more resilient. Societal norms will resist. You will hear whispers. You've changed. You're no longer the person we knew. You've grown cold. But in truth, you have reclaimed the warmth that was always yours. You have honed your empathy into a choice rather than a habit. You wield it not as an invisible leash, but as an intentional gift. And that gift, once spare and precious, shines more brightly than any endless outpouring could. Perhaps you felt an echo of this tension in your own life. You reached a limit, stepped back, and watched chaos ensue. You felt relief mixed with guilt, power laced with doubt. These contradictions mark the empath's path, the simultaneous pull of service and self-preservation, the dance between giving and guarding. It's a tightrope walk that demands constant recalibration. As the world scrambles for emotional equilibrium in your absence, you stand on the precipice of your own transformation. You face a choice. Return to the old role, predictable, draining, invisible, or step fully into your sovereign self, unpredictable, potent, and, yes, dangerous. Because a fed-up empath who has reclaimed their energy is no longer a pawn of others' emotions. They are an agent of change, a living embodiment of self-authorship. In the next section, we will arrive at the fulcrum of this journey, the dramatic turning point where the empath's withdrawal is not merely a passive retreat but an active reclaiming of power. You will see why, for Jung, this moment is both the darkest and the most liberating of all. Prepare yourself to witness the profound revelation that transforms an unwitting victim into the catalyst of collective awakening. And then it happens. You reach that moment when saying no doesn't bruise your spirit but crystallizes your power. You feel the shockwaves surge through your relationships, a sudden jolt that forces everyone to pause. The colleague who leaned on you for every team crisis recoils, off balance without your steady calm. The family member who texted you at dawn for comfort stares at silence on the screen, unmoored by the absence they never noticed. The friend who expected your empathy as a birthright meets a boundary so firm it cuts through their entitlement. In that fractured space, you see the truth flashing back at you. Your endless availability was never gratitude's magnet, but invisibility's cloak. People didn't notice you because you never stood still long enough for them to see your essence. They loved your kindness, not you, and the more you gave, the less you existed in their eyes. That realization lands like a thunderbolt. To give without limit is to vanish. Jung called this the paradox of psychic withdrawal. Your greatest kindness, when unrestrained, becomes the very thing that erases you. By reclaiming a sliver of your inner energy, you shatter the unconscious contract that kept you invisible. And as you do, you uncover your authentic self, standing in stark relief against the backdrop of others' unmet expectations. This turning point isn't about rage or revenge. It's about sovereignty. When you guard your psychic reserves, you aren't withholding love, you're defining its boundaries. You're saying, I am here, fully present, but on my terms. That shift unsettles the status quo more profoundly than any outburst ever could. It forces society's mirror to crack wide open, spilling back repressed tensions and unexamined needs. Philosophically, this moment aligns with Jung's vision of the autonomous self, an individual who no longer reacts to unconscious demands but acts from inner conviction. You've moved from puppet to puppeteer, from vessel to source. Your empathy becomes intentional, no longer an automatic valve that lets others' emotions flood through you. Instead, it flows like a measured current, sustaining both you and those you choose to support. As the dust settles, the world around you faces a stark choice: adapt or fracture. People can learn to share emotional responsibility, to develop their own resilience, or they can crumble, haunted by the absence of the empathic lifeline they took for granted. This upheaval is the true climax, not a moment of destruction, but of revelation. Because in claiming your energy, you demonstrate that real freedom isn't found in boundless giving, but in balanced exchange. You prove that love given from overflow, rather than debt, creates genuine connection. And in that revolution of the heart, you become, paradoxically, the most indispensable person of all. As you stand at the threshold of this new way of being, remember that sovereignty over your own energy begins with simple actions. First, carve out sacred pauses in your daily life, ritualized moments when you step away from emotional demands and breathe into yourself. It might be as brief as 5 minutes of silence before answering a text, or a nightly walk without your phone. These pauses act as psychic valves, allowing you to release what you've absorbed and refill your inner well. Second, practice the art of saying no without apology. Notice how even a single refusal can feel like a tremor in your chest. That tremor is your psyche reclaiming its voice. You don't owe long explanations. A calm, "I'm not available for that right now," is enough. Each boundary you set is a declaration that your energy is finite and precious. Third, engage in regular shadow work. Keep a journal where you capture moments of emotional overload, times when you felt swept away by another's pain or anxiety. Reflect on what triggered you and ask, whose emotion was this? By naming the feeling as mine or not mine, you sharpen the mental boundary between self and other. Over time, this practice rewires your mind to recognize when empathy becomes absorption. Fourth, cultivate a circle of accountability. Share your boundary goals with a trusted friend or therapist who will gently remind you when you slip back into overgiving. External support strengthens internal resolve, making it easier to maintain limits even when guilt or social pressure arises. Fifth, prioritize activities that recharge you at a soul level. For some, it's creative expression, painting, writing, music that channels libidinal energy into something alive and renewing. For others, nature walks, meditation, or physical movement serve as conduits for release and replenishment. Guard these practices as jealously as you would any sacred ritual. When you integrate these strategies, you step into the flow of balanced empathy, giving from your overflow, not your deficit. You begin to experience compassion satisfaction rather than compassion fatigue. Your relationships transform. Others learn to bring their own burdens to the table, and a reciprocal dynamic emerges. Philosophically, this journey reconnects you to what Jung called the authentic self, the core of your being untainted by unconscious compulsion. In claiming your psychic energy, you choose to live intentionally rather than reactively. You trade invisibility for presence, burnout for vibrancy, and emotional servitude for dialogue. This path is not a retreat into selfishness. It is a return to interconnectedness. When you stand upright in your own power, you offer a clearer reflection for others. You model the balanced exchange of giving and receiving that underpins meaningful connection. You remind people that empathy thrives on mutual respect, not unilateral sacrifice. Reflect on how this applies in your daily life. Where do you habitually overextend? Which relationships leave you drained rather than uplifted? What small boundary could you implement tomorrow? A limit on late-night messages, a refusal to mediate every conflict, a commitment to a daily pause. Now ask yourself, have you ever felt invisible despite always being there for others? What would it feel like to step back and let others learn to carry their own emotional weight? How might your world change if you gave from a place of renewal rather than depletion? If this video has sparked something in you, share your thoughts below. Tell us about the moment you realized that endless giving was erasing you. Describe the first boundary you set and how it shifted your life. Your stories can inspire others to embark on their own journey of psychic reclamation. If you found these insights valuable, please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you won't miss our next deep dive into the hidden currents of the psyche. Share this video with someone who always puts others first. They might need to hear that their energy matters too. Remember, you are not a bottomless well. You are the architect of your own emotional landscape. Guard your inner light and watch as the world around you, once dependent on your glow, learns to shine on its own.